All right, thank you for joining again. I'm Sabina Martin. I'm a K-State TAB partner. I'm the TAB contact for Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. So welcome to the Heartland Federal Partners Grant Writing Workshop Series Session 2. We had the Session 1 webinar last week on Thursday, and that's all been posted to the website where you registered in case you're interested in the recording of that for that webinar and the presentations. Today's presentations will be, well, actually the presentations are uploaded already, but the recording will be uploaded later on as well. So for today, as I said, I'm going to be moderating, and Michelle Stoneheimer, who is also a TAB partner, will assist with the chat and everything else that's needed, and Dana will be behind the scenes making sure that everything is okay from a technical standpoint. Speaking about technical notes, if you experience technical difficulties with your connections, you have two options. Either you dial the number on the screen that you see here, or you email to this email address. Probably the faster way would be to call in and say what you need and what doesn't work right for you. And I already mentioned the presentation is being recorded and will be available on the website where you registered. And Dana placed that link, I believe, also in the chat. So here's some Zoom basics, and I think by now we all know how Zoom works. We have been doing that so much lately, but just in case, you know, to make sure everything works well, just make sure you stay muted throughout the webinar. You should be muted already. I mean, obviously, except for the presenters, they need to unmute themselves when their time is up to speak. Make sure your video is off. That helps with the bandwidth for the whole webinar. Also make sure, please, that the name, your screen name, is the same name that you registered under for this webinar, because we will send out certificates of attendance later on, and we have to match the screen names basically to the registration. So just make sure those names are identical. If you don't know how to change your name in case you are on with a different name, you can do this by clicking on the participants icon on the Zoom toolbar. And when the list of participants come up, locate yourself, click on the More button, and select Rename. And then a new box will appear asking you to enter a new screen name. And obviously, I mean, we want to be this as interactive as possible, but we ask you to use the chat feature in the toolbar for asking your questions. At the very end, we have a Q&A, and depending how it goes, or if we need more clarification, we may unmute the person who asked the question, just in case that works a little bit better. Here is the agenda for today, and you all looked at that, I assume, already before you signed up here, but just as a refresher. And while you look at that, we have a very short poll, and there it is. If you could answer that, please. Very few questions. Actually, only 2. And we'll see where that gets us. All right, it looks like the absolute majority of participants, just changed. But most of you have not applied for any of the grants that we will be talking about today, which are the environmental justice grants, environmental education grants from EPA, the EPA Brownfields grants, specifically cleanup and assessment for today. All right. Thank you for that poll. Dana, can you X out of that? Or maybe I can do that. All right, back to the agenda. So first we have Jacob Burney. He is with the National EPA headquarters in DC. He is the Environmental Justice Grant Coordinator. So he will provide an update on environmental justice priorities and investments at EPA, and then segue right into environmental justice grants, basics for the grants, general overview. And then we'll have Greg Cotter with EPA Region 7 talking about environmental education grants, and then Jennifer Morris, who will talk about all the Brownfields grants that are available from EPA. Okay, hang on a minute here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So Jacob, if you would like to go ahead, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sabine. This up. Okay, everyone. Yep, my name is Jacob Burney. I'm Division Director for the Grants Management Division here at EPA headquarters within the Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. I'm going to provide an overview of the environmental justice related investments here at EPA, as well as mention across the federal government, how the administration is focusing and integrating environmental justice and equity into everything that we're doing here at EPA. I'll also detail overall our investments and the specific different environmental justice grant vehicles that we have available and the way that we're tackling this historic level of investment in environmental justice and equity. So to give an overview, we have the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, better known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, that was passed. That's a once-in-a-generation investment in infrastructure, obviously. So roads, bridges, rails, electric vehicle chargers, clean energy, climate resilience, clean energy projects. In concert with that, we have the Inflation Reduction Act, so the IRA funding. So this is an additional historic investment in climate action, climate adaptation, and specifically in environmental justice and equity. So collectively, with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we're looking at an investment within EPA of over $60 billion. With the Inflation Reduction Act, you're looking at another almost $30 billion. And specifically for our program, we're looking at $3 billion specifically from the Inflation Reduction Act, including $2.8 billion for specific environmental justice grants that are going directly to community-based nonprofit organizations and or organizations that are partnering directly with community-based nonprofit organizations. That $3 billion investment includes $200 million for technical assistance, support, and training to applicants interested in accessing that $3 billion worth of funding. So there'll be specific additional technical assistance guidance for those applicants applying community-based nonprofit organizations who are looking to apply for, access, and then manage that funding. Outside of that, we're looking at our regular baseline appropriations. So this is every year the amount that Congress appropriates to EPA specifically for the environmental justice program. So overall in fiscal year 2022, we had $100 million as our baseline appropriations. So that's outside of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and outside the Inflation Reduction Act. And in 2023, we had a baseline appropriations of $108 million. Now, to give context for that, in terms of when I first started with the environmental justice program back in 2015, annually, we would have about $2 million for all the environmental justice grants nationwide in any one calendar year. So with our baseline appropriations, we're looking at $108 million. Half of that, we're looking to allocate specifically for environmental justice grants. And on top of that, looking at $3 billion through the Inflation Reduction Act funding. So we're talking about historic levels of investment in the environmental justice grants program and specifically for communities and community-based nonprofit organizations to manage funds directly that can transform and change the reality on the ground for communities. So we're head over heels about this historic investment. Now, with the Inflation Reduction Act funding specifically, there are some time constraints and considerations that we have with this funding. So all of that $2.8 billion, almost $3 billion, we as EPA must obligate that funding. That means award that funding all by September 30th of 2026. So in terms of the regular timeline it takes for EPA to award any of our EPA grants, to award nearly $3 billion of EPA grants specifically through this program in a little over 2 years. It's going to be quite a hustle to get all that funding out. In addition to that, that $200 million worth of technical assistance is on the exact same time frame and the timeline where that $200 million also has to be expended by September 30th of 2026. Now, any specific grant that we award with the Inflation Reduction Act funding that we got through our program, each of those grants is limited to a 3-year project period. So whether that's a $100,000 grant, a $500,000 grant, a $1 million grant, or a $20 million grant, any grant with Inflation Reduction Act funds through our program is limited to 36 months to expend those funds and to complete a project. So that is a time consideration we have in how we're structuring the grants program to ensure that any grantee that receives this funding has ample time within 36 months to complete the project, but a level of funding that is meaningful enough to make sure that it is transformative and actually addresses the needs that the community-based organization is looking to address through their program. Eligible entities, I mentioned before, community-based nonprofit organizations specifically are listed out in the Inflation Reduction Act statute as being primary recipients for the Inflation Reduction Act funding. In addition to that, any eligible entity that receives the funds has to partner with a community-based nonprofit organization if they themselves are not a community-based nonprofit organizations. So a federally recognized tribal government, if they want to access any of that $2.8 billion worth of funding, they must partner with a community-based nonprofit organization on their application to be able to receive those funds. And we're defining a partnership as being a subaward. That means an exchange of funds directly to that community-based nonprofit organization to be eligible for that federally recognized tribe, local government, or institution of higher education to receive those Inflation Reduction Act funds. So it isn't a situation where a federally recognized tribe can partner with a community-based nonprofit organization in kind, where there's no exchange of funds, and that federally recognized tribal government is eligible to receive any of the Inflation Reduction Act funds. There has to be an exchange of funds. So we want legitimate, strong partnerships with the community-based nonprofit organization for any entity to be able to receive the funds. And overall, there's also the Thriving Communities Network. So I wanted to mention this as well. So this is a federal interagency group that's working together to address the needs and to administer the funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. So the Thriving Communities Network, it's several federal agencies that are working together in concert to address place-based needs for communities, to administer the grant funding, to administer the technical assistance, to develop relationships with communities, planning and project delivery support for those communities, to manage the funds, access the funds, and to transform the reality on the ground for their communities. So here are the participating agencies in the Thriving Communities Network. We have, of course, Environmental Protection Agency, as well as Department of Transportation. So the Department of Transportation, DOT, was mandated in the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2022 to stand up the Thriving Communities Network. So that was part of their mandate. So in the subsequent time frame, they've been able to partner with EPA as well as Department of Energy, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, USDA, Agriculture, GSA, General Services Administration, Commerce, and FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Association. So we're all working together in concert under the Thriving Communities Network banner. And there are specific programs that are part of the Thriving Communities Network that we at EPA are administering, and I'll detail those later on in the presentation. So here are some of the participating technical assistance programs and technical assistance providers under the Thriving Communities Network. So here at the top, you'll see us list our Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers. These are what we have dubbed our TICTACs as the acronym. So these are technical assistance centers that are place-based, providing fundamental technical assistance training and support to communities looking to access funds, both federal grants, local grants, state-based grants, to address any environmental justice and or energy justice related issue. The technical assistance includes training on grant writing, grant application preparation, as well as grant management, making sure that there is compliance and understanding of all of the grant related regulations for federal grants and local grants. And overall community management, capacity building, and partnership and relationship building facilitation. So that's kind of what the TICTACs are focused on, that fundamental support. But there are also other technical assistance providers within the Thriving Communities Network, from Department of Transportation and HUD, the Thriving Communities Initiative, the USDA Rules Partnership Network, Department of Energy, and their Economic Revitalization Rapid Response Teams, Economic Development Administration with the Economic Recovery Corps, FEMA. They have multiple technical assistance programs, and GSA as well. And I'll be able to highlight in a little bit more detail the technical assistance centers that we have at EPA through the TICTACs and where those specific TICTACs are located. But overall, the goals of the Environmental Justice Grants Program, and now I'm going to get into some of the specific EJ grant related vehicles that we have available here within the program. We want to provide resources as soon as possible on the ground to communities and partners. So we're looking to expedite getting the funding out to communities and making it accessible to communities so we can meet communities at their needs and where they are. So we've restructured the Environmental Justice Grant Program where there are 4 different levels of community readiness where communities can plug in and be able to understand exactly where they fit in, where they're at, so they can apply for the appropriate funding vehicle and access those funds. We want to be able to prove to all stakeholders that investments in communities are the best investments to solve the toughest problems here throughout the nation in places with the biggest challenges. We want to achieve lasting and meaningful change on the ground. So this is a historic level of investment in communities, in environmental justice, and equity, and we want to make sure that we are funding transformative projects that change the reality on the ground for communities. And we want to be the bottom up to all the other top downs. We want all of these projects to be community driven, where we have those community-based nonprofit organizations driving the conversation, driving the direction of the projects being proposed, to drive the relationships and the decisions that the decision makers are making in terms of addressing the needs for the communities. So here's what we're calling our on-ramp within the Environmental Justice Grants Program. Here's the restructuring that I mentioned with the 4 different levels of community readiness where applicants can apply. So here at the beginning, we have the assessment level. So this is where our Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, our TICTACs, come in to really assess the needs for the community, provide that fundamental support to community-based nonprofit organizations, grassroots organizations who are just getting started in the grant space, who may not know where to go to get support, who to turn to, what programs to apply for, how to get set up in SAM.gov, the System for Award Management, how to get registered in that system, how to go through the grants.gov process. So the TICTACs are there to provide that fundamental support. Now, after that, we have so now the community understands they've assessed the needs of their own organization. They've started to assess the needs in their community. They're looking to start tackling some of those issues in their community. That's the planning and project development step. So providing accessible funding to communities to start to tackle those community issues is that second level of community readiness. After that, we have pilots and partnerships. This is where some of our legacy environmental justice grants programs come in, where the actual recipients of the grants can actually manage the grant funding directly themselves from EPA. That's our collaborative problem solving grants program, as well as our environmental justice government to government grants program. And then that 4th step of community readiness is our implementation step. So this is where we're going to release soon our environmental and climate justice community change grants. So these are going to be transformative block grants where we're looking at between $10 to $20 million per grant going to a community for a host of environmental related issues. So climate adaptation, workforce development, clean energy transition projects, air-related projects, of course, air monitoring related projects, water related projects, really meaningful refurbishment projects, really meaningful projects that really change the reality on the ground. So community center refurbishment, asbestos remediation, all kinds of things that have long been standing and have been long-standing issues in communities. We're trying to provide a level of funding to communities to access that funding directly, work with a coalition of stakeholders inside their partnership group, and start to make meaningful change for communities on the ground. So I'll detail best I can in the time that we have left some of those different EJ grant vehicles to give you a sense of how these all fit together. So this is the assessment level. So I mentioned this already. So these are our TIC tacs. Our TIC tacs, we started that process last year in 2022. We have awarded all of our Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers. We have 16 of them as right now, currently. So 16 technical assistance centers, 13 of them are regionally based, and they're providing that fundamental technical assistance and support to grassroots organizations, community-based nonprofit organizations. We partnered directly with the Department of Energy on the TIC tac. So Department of Energy provided funding to each of the TIC tacs as well to start tackling the energy-related issues that are of interest and are of need to communities as well. The TIC tacs really are the front door entry point for communities. So there's no barrier to entry. The technical assistance is completely free of charge. Communities can start to reach out to their technical assistance center, request specific technical assistance, get direction, get general grant writing training, general grant management training as well. Each of the TIC tacs are receiving at least $10 million each over a 5-year period. So right now, the TIC tacs are standing up their basic operations. They're internally staffing up themselves, making sure that they have the staff power in place to handle all of the technical assistance requests that they're starting to get from communities. They're standing up their websites, conducting their outreach, being cognizant of the digital divide, making sure that communities are aware that they're starting their operations. So we hope that the TIC tacs will start to deliver some of that specific technical assistance to communities at the beginning of the calendar year, next year, 2024. But for the next couple of months, they're still staffing up and standing up a lot of their processes to start conducting a lot of the intake for communities. But here is where the TIC tacs are located on the next slide. For the 16, so we have at least one TIC tac that we're looking to have for each EPA region. EPA is divided into 10 EPA regions. So here's the list here. As Sabine mentioned, this slide deck is a resource for you. So wherever your community is located, you'll be able to see exactly what TIC tac is assigned to your community. For EPA Region 1 and EPA Region 8, we're in the process of selecting additional TIC tacs to cover those regions, and we're hoping to make selections for those 2 regions at the start of the new calendar year. And here's our TIC tacs map. So it gives you a sense, and our expectation for our TIC tac network is that it is going to grow and mature over the 5-year project period as well. So with these 16 hubs, these 16 main TIC tac coordinating organizations, they each have a multitude of spokes. So the different partners that are actually helping the TIC tacs provide that dedicated technical assistance on the ground numbers at 140 plus partners collectively throughout the TIC tac network. So it's not just those 16 lead organizations, but each of those lead organizations has a family of spokes, other community-based organizations that are helping them do the outreach to the region to start conducting that technical assistance and addressing those needs for communities as well. So in concert with the Thriving Community TIC-TACs, the TIC-TACs are providing technical assistance to communities. We're soon going to announce our Thriving Communities grant makers. So the grant makers are going to be providing direct financial assistance to communities. So we're looking at a two-pronged approach through our Thriving Communities TIC-TACs, or our Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, and our Thriving Communities grant makers to provide comprehensive support to communities from both a technical assistance front as well as a financial assistance front. So the grant makers themselves, we're looking to have at least one grant maker assigned to each EPA region, similar to the structure of the TIC-TACs. The grant makers will receive $50 million each, and they're going to be pass-through entities. They're going to pass through most of that $50 million directly to communities. So at least 40 million of that $50 million has to be administered to communities via subgrants. And these subgrants are going to range from $75,000 to $350,000 each. And these are for a multitude of different environmentally related projects that the community wants to tackle. But we're looking for the grant makers to be announced before the end of this calendar year, and they'll actually start being able to administer their subgrants and standing up their own competitions late spring, early summer of 2024. The big thing with the grant makers is accessibility. So being able to apply for a subgrant to a grant maker removes the process of a community-based organization having to go through sam.gov or go through grants.gov and go through a long 9-month to 12-month process before they can actually get their EPA grant. So with the grant makers, it streamlines the process significantly. A community that is looking for grant funding can send over a work plan and a budget quickly over to the grant maker. The grant maker can score that particular application. If it scores well enough, they can expeditiously get the funding to that community through a subgrant rather than going through the long bureaucratic process of grants.gov, for example. But each of these grant makers are going to be in operation for 3 years to administer that $40 million worth of funding to thousands of communities across the nation. Check my time. After that, we've just announced kind of our pilots and partnership step. We've just announced 186 selectees for our EJ Collaborative Problem Solving grants, as well as our government to government grants. Now, unlike the grant makers, the EJ Collaborative Problem Solving government to government grants, that's a direct grant opportunity where an applicant will apply directly to EPA through the regular bureaucratic grants.gov process, and they'll manage EPA federal grant dollars directly. But this level of funding is higher. So they're $500,000 projects for the collaborative problem solving, where all of those projects are specifically for community-based nonprofit organizations to be the lead. And then, of course, the government to government projects are for government entities, governmental agencies, governmental organizations to actually receive the funds. So it's the federal government providing EJ funding directly to other governmental organizations. So state governments, local governments, tribal governments can apply for the government to government grants. But what we announced last week on October 24th was the selection of 98 collaborative problem solving recipients. So this is 98 community-based nonprofit organizations receiving up to $500,000 each. And we're looking to start making those awards starting in December through February to make all 98 of those awards. And we have 88 of the government to government grants. So this is up to $1 million each. Each of those governmental agencies that we've selected were required to have a partnership directly with a community-based nonprofit organization. And as I mentioned at the top, that partnership has to be a subaward. So an amount of funding going from that governmental organization to that community-based nonprofit organization to ensure that the community-based nonprofit organization has an equitable seat at the table in terms of the direction of that overall project. Same timeline for when we're expecting to get those awards out the door, starting in December and through February of 2024. but really, really excited to make that announcement. Historic level of funding for either of these two programs. We've never had an opportunity to award this level of funding at any one time between either of these two environmental justice grant vehicles. And this is just a list of the Inflation Reduction Act allowable project activities that the collaborative problem solving and the government to government projects will be funding. And lastly, what we're looking to announce here before the end of the calendar year is the opening of our community change grants. So these are the large block grants that I mentioned at the top. These are $10 to $20 million per project, a 3-year project period. This is going to provide a level of funding that is going to hopefully change the reality on the ground for communities. We're looking at infrastructure projects, revitalization work, refurbishment, significant projects that communities that have been longstanding issues in communities that they'll be able to actually tackle directly through these $10 to $20 million projects. The timing for this competition, we're looking to open it before the end of this calendar year. It's going to be open for 12 months straight with a rolling deadline, so communities aren't going to be under time constraints to try to get an application in. Communities can apply for a change grant when they're ready. It's going to be open for a whole calendar year. There's an innovative application process. There's a written portion, just the traditional application process, but also a verbal portion, an oral presentation portion where applicants that score well on that written portion will be able to interview directly with EPA and better describe exactly what they envision with their $10 to $20 million project. There's going to be a technical assistance provider that will help assist applicants who are looking to access this community change grant funding. So once we release the new notice of funding opportunity for the community change grants, we'll provide detail on how communities can access the technical assistance provider to help them frame up their project proposal, their budget, their planning, make sure that they have all the T's crossed, I's dotted on any permitting considerations that are coming into play for an infrastructure related project. If there's lead service line replacement that they wanted to pilot in a certain community or neighborhood, all of these things that technical assistance provider will be able to help the community think through before they put forth their application. And this is just another mention of that technical assistance in that contractor. And here's some additional detail, just background on the technical assistance centers themselves. I know that soon we're going to start the Inflation Reduction Act Roadshow. I believe that roadshow, it's an EPA initiative that is going to start to explain, delineate the different funding vehicles under the Inflation Reduction Act that EPA is providing overall, not just the Environmental Justice Program, but this is an overview of the Environmental Justice Program itself. And I wanted to give ample time for question and answer, and I believe that that'll happen after the other presenters present on the other grant opportunities available as well. Here are just resources and links, and I can stop there.
All right, well, thank you, Jacob. That was a great presentation and lots of money available, as it looks like. We have one question in the chat, and I think you may have answered that already in your presentation, at least a little bit. Question is, will there be an opportunity to apply in 2024? And it didn't say for which grant.
Yeah, for 2024, so those grant makers, those large pass-through entities, they're going to open their individual competitions in 2024. We hope that they'll be able to open those in late spring, early summer of 2024. In terms of the collaborative problem solving and government to government opportunities, so we just announced 186 of those. We're focused on making sure that we get those awards out as expeditiously as we can, but we haven't made any determinations if we're going to have a 2024 round for EJCPS or G2G just yet.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Jacob at this point? I don't see anything in the chat. Nothing popping in. And as Jacob mentioned, we'll have a Q&A segment at the end of the webinar. So if you can't think of anything now, hold it and then we'll answer later. All right. Thanks again, Jacob. Next up will be Greg Cotter with EPA Region 7. And Greg, if you want to add some more to this very brief introduction, go ahead.
That's fine. So good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank KSU TAB for this opportunity to talk about environmental education grants. My name is Greg Cotter. I'm a project officer in Region 7, and I am the environmental education coordinator for Region 7 as well. So here, I'll share my screen with you guys. There we go. All right, brilliant. Before EPA, I was a high school teacher, so I'm okay with delivering like this. We'll see how it goes. So again, Greg Cotter and the environmental education coordinator here at Region 7. So I'm going to talk to you guys about the EE grant program, kind of give you the 30,000-foot view of what the program is and what kind of grants we're looking at, and then an opportunity to talk about this year's open grant season. We're currently in the open solicitation season for environmental education grants. It's open from now until November the 8th. So if you've got any brilliant ideas written on cocktail napkins, then this would be the time. We'll talk about eligibility for those grants. I've also got some helpful resources and tips for applying. And I'll also make a shameless plug for two award initiatives, the Presidential Environmental Youth Award and the Presidential Innovation Award for Environmental Education. So you'll have to excuse this somewhat text-heavy slide, but the goals and objective of the environmental education program is to fund grants that support locally focused environmental education projects that promote environmental stewardship, with stewardship being the operative word here. The idea that we're building capacity. So not just understanding of environmental concerns, but also getting students and young people interested and involved and active stakeholders in the environment. We accomplish this by providing financial support for projects that design, demonstrate, or disseminate environmental education practices, methods, or techniques. So that's the 30,000-foot view. And the main goal here is we've got serious environmental challenges, and the more we can arm and equip young people with the tools they need to recognize those challenges and tackle those challenges moving forward, then the better off we're going to be. So ideally here, I'd be working myself out of a job. The better we do at this, the better our future will look. That's the 30,000-foot view. But again, we are currently in the open solicitation season for grants for this year. So 10 notice of funding opportunities were issued on September 14th of this year. We're looking at approximately $3,600,000 in available funding nationwide, with 3 to 5 awards for each notice of funding opportunity. That's between 30 and 40 awards nationally. The environmental education grant awards are between $50,000 to $100,000. And the proposal must include both an educational and environmental priority. And we'll do a brief deep dive into what that means for each of those two priorities. There is also a required match of 25% and a sub-award program of 25%. And again, I'll do a deep dive into those as well. And the application deadline is November 8th at 11:59 Eastern Time. So eligibility, who gets to apply for these grants? Local education agencies like school districts, colleges and universities, state and local education agencies, nonprofits with a 501c3 status, tribal organizations with a 501c3 status, tribal education agencies, and non-commercial educational broadcast entities. I went ahead and highlighted colleges and universities just based on this this audience. It's worth noting that one of the panel members here was a recipient of a Region 7 environmental education grant, and it was K-State's Pollution Prevention Institute. So since 1992, over $91 million have been awarded in environmental education grants, and the lion's share of that has been to nonprofit organizations, colleges and universities, and local school districts and school boards. So quite a bit. This year, we're open till November 8th. And the application must include a project narrative. And this is where we get to the matching piece. So there is a requirement for a non-federal match for a minimum of 25% of the budget. So for example, if an environmental education grant were requesting $100,000, so the ceiling of the environmental ed grant amount, 25% or $33,333 would need to be the non-federal. So the total budget for that grant would be $133,333. Of the EPA monies awarded, there is a requirement that 25% of that be spent on subawards of $5,000 or less. So for example, 5 subawards at $5,000 for a total of $25,000 on a $100,000 grant would satisfy this requirement. The project period for environmental education grants is between 1 and 2 years. And it must include both educational and environmental priorities. We'll talk about those on the next slide. More just nuts and bolts, it must demonstrate the proposed project has not been previously funded, can submit multiple proposals as long as for a different project and each is submitted separately, and be sure that you're submitting your application to the correct EPA region. So I've mentioned it a couple times now, the requirement that there is both an educational priority and an environmental priority for environmental ed grants. So examples of educational priorities are community projects, career development, environmental education capacity building, environmental justice, or newly added this year, indigenous knowledge. And again, if stewardship was the operative word, all of these priorities speak very much to stewardship. Of the environmental priorities, one of 3, so addressing climate change or improving air quality, ensuring clean and safe water, or cleaning up our communities by revitalizing land and preventing contamination. We're going to define underserved communities as a community identified as a disadvantaged community in the climate and economic justice screening tool developed by the Council on Environmental Quality, or a high poverty area, persistent poverty county, or Title I schools for environmental ed grants. Lots of helpful links. I did see in the chat that this will be available on the K-State TAB website, so I encourage everyone to go look at these. The most important, though, I'll just jump to the next slide, is the grant calculator at epa.gov/education/grants. This will ensure that if you are going to submit a proposal for a environmental education grant, that your proposal includes the right math for the match and the subaward. Because you want to check your math and then double check it, and this will definitely get you pointed in the right direction. So there's also a link on here for the grant calculator. Read the notice of funding opportunity and the frequently asked questions before doing the application. Organize the work plan. Organize your application around the scoring criteria. You can see the scoring criteria, knowing what you're going to be judged on before you start writing it's going to set you up for success. Write simply and clearly. Brevity is kind of the name of the game. Never use 10 words when 5 will do. And that'll ensure that you stick to the page limits as well. So certainly quicker than the environmental justice. But questions? Do we have questions?
There's nothing in the chat, but if anybody does have a question, please enter it into the chat now.
I'm sticking around too, so.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Thank you. Let's just give it a couple more seconds. Somebody's typing frantically here. While they type, I also included my contact information on this last slide. So if something comes up later or you'd like to get in touch with me offline, please do so. And you can reach me at cotter.gregory@epa.gov. Perfect. Thank you. Doesn't look like any more questions are coming in at this point in time. So thank you, Greg, and thanks for sticking around. And we'll see what happens. Right. All right. Up next, Jennifer Morris. She will tell us all about the great Brownfields grant that EPA has available either on an annual or biannual basis.
Unmute there. You always
There you
have to have the one person who talks while it's muted, right? That was me this time. Thank you all for having me. I'm Jennifer Morris from the Environmental Protection Agency in Region 7. And I am thrilled to speak to you today about the Brownfields competitive grants that deal with assessment cleanup of sites. It's not our only competitive program. Alma Moreno Lom will talk to you next week about our job training grants program. So we figured out I have to click to move on. So the Brownfields mission, not everybody knows what Brownfields are. So I like to tell you about what Brownfields are because the folks who join us are frequently from communities where brownfields are affecting your lives the most. The Brownfields mission is designed to empower states, tribes, and the communities and other stakeholders to work together to prevent, assess, and safely clean up and sustainably reuse brownfields. This means that you're going to do the work, and then later on, we're going to take credit, which you'll see here in a second. How do I get rid of all these people? There they are. A brownfield is a property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or the potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. These little crummy properties that you have hanging around in your community forever that you wish someone would do something with are the brownfields in your community. And these are frequently the things that weigh communities down. And often they are in environmental justice or disadvantaged communities. The EPA supports community efforts to revitalize brownfields through the grants program and through our land revitalization program. I encourage you to click the links on this slide when you have this program and explore our website for more information. I'm not going to go into it here, but there's tons, absolutely tons of information that you need to look at about our Brownfields program and our land revitalization and technical assistance program. Now, the Brownfields redevelopment process is this. We identify, you identify properties, you see them every day, you drive around, assess them, assess whether there are environmental conditions, you clean them up if they need to be, and then you sustainably redevelop them. But along the way, see there on the side is community engagement. It is imperative for grant writing purposes and for the redevelopment success that you have community engagement at the very beginning. Communities are the ones who are going to identify which properties are the most important to get cleaned up. Communities are going to tell you what's been going on at a site, and they're going to tell you how they want it cleaned up and reused. Now let's talk about the 24 grant offerings. This is a very busy slide, and I've glommed it all on here together, but we'll split it up in a second. What's really, really cool about the bill project, or the IIJA, is that we have the ability to give more money than we usually do, meaning we have the ability to give grants in bigger dollar amounts than we have in the past. So when you apply for these assessment grants and cleanup grants, you will be suggested to identify how much you are applying for, and you will compete against people who are applying for similar amounts of those. So what I'm saying is, If you apply for an assessment grant as a coalition, you're only going to compete against other coalitions that came in for $2 million. You're not going to compete against a little community that came in for 500,000. So that's what's really cool about, yay, we got extra money, but this is also going to be a more reasonable competition. Yay. The other thing that's really cool, I'll point out, the cleanup grants, woo, go up to $5 million this year. $5 million. That's taking advantage of what the statute allowed us, the bill statute allowed us to do, go to a really high level. Not very many will be allowed to go up to 5 million, but we will be able to give like $5 million grants this year. So we can do some really big cleanups. The other really cool thing, because of bill, is there is no cost share requirement. Now the clock is ticking for how long we're going to be able to have that no cost share. Because in the statute, normally there's a 20% cost share on cleanup grants. But while we're in our 5-year time frame on bill, we have no cost share for those cleanup grants. So you got a big dirty project, let's get it assessed, let's get it cleaned up. And then on the revolving loan fund grants, while we are not going to have new revolving loan fund grants this year, our supplemental funding requests will be up to $5 million for those who have existing programs, and those will be due in March of next year. And we anticipate that there will be new RLFs offered next year. So it would be opportune to get a pipeline going this year. And how do you get a pipeline ready? Why, you come in and get an assessment grant. That's right. You get some sites assessed. But what can an assessment grant do? It's important to look at the various things that assessments can it's not just about doing the assessment. You can inventory. You look at cleanup planning. So actually developing what your cleanup plan is going to be. Also, you can do some redevelopment planning. And you can do your community involvement. And I want to drop in the chat, if I am very successful with being nimble with my cutting and pasting, I want to drop in the chat a link to the come on, Jennifer, be nimble. Jack, be nimble. Where's the Zoom? Back to the Zoom. Back to the Zoom. The Zoom. I'm going to go back to here. I want to type this in. Paste. Okay, so that wasn't good. So there it is. On the Brownfields website, there are a number of fact sheets on what things account for planning. And I would like for you to check that out, because that is the, I need to get back to my actual, are you seeing my screen, my presentation?
Yes, we are.
Okay, good. Whew, now I'm back to my presentation. Okay, so those are the things I dropped in the chat. Those are things that you can do for planning activities. Those are very important because you'll notice in your NOFA that having a redevelopment plan for your target area is an important thing to have. And also having the ability to do planning is something you can include. Now, there are two kinds of assessment. There is the community-wide assessment grants, which this time will go up for $500,000 for 4 years. There's also here's an example of a community-wide assessment done in Coralville. They've done a lot of community-wide assessments in Coralville, Iowa, if you're familiar with the area at all. But they're also doing coalition assessment grants. Coalition assessment grants are a especially powerful way to get a lot of communities access to the federal dollars who may not normally have the ability to access those funds. What you have is a lead eligible partner and then a non-lead member, at least 2, not more than 4 lead partners. And one of those partners needs to be it needs to be a community group, a community, a not-for-profit community group or something like that. And each of those partners would have a target site in their community. I encourage you read the guidelines for more information, but coalition grants allow for access for smaller communities, for entities who maybe don't have the wherewithal to access a big brownfield grant. They can pool their resources, have somebody be the lead entity, and they can get a lot done. An example of that would be, and here's what I was just talking about. They would get $1 million this year, is what they would have. An example of this, the little tiny town of Manchester, Iowa, population of 4,000, almost 5,000, had a site assessed through the ECIA. It's like a regional planning group or a council of governments. The city acquired a former service center and removed asbestos with the help of IDNR. And then there was development of $1.34 million on the riverfront park to create access to a whitewater park. Now, the whitewater park already existed, but there was no access to it. And so now they've got this amazing feature that brings all these people to this tiny little town. Well, this tiny little town wasn't on its own going to be able to do this, but with this, through this access, was able to do it. Let's talk a little bit about the cleanup grants. Again, $500,000, $2 million, or $5 million. That's the grouping that you'll be able to apply for. Cleanup grants, cities or whoever it is must own the site at the time of application. An example of a cleanup site that we had here in the region is this harvester building in Council Bluffs. And if you look at it, the additional extension was actually built over some additional brownfield area that was assessed. So brownfields are often cleanup and assessment and are put together. You're stacking resources. And they use $24 million, and it's a benefit to this community. Now, the revolving loan fund grants, I've included what they are in the program here, and I'll let you understand about what they are. It is a program. It is a way for you to capitalize. The recipient becomes the loan, the entity that makes the loans. And they do that through subgrants to whomever is the borrower. And they can also make subgrants which aren't paid back. At least 50% of the money that goes out must be done in loans, but some can be done in subgrants and don't have to be loaned. The money does not ever come back to EPA. It becomes program income, which then is revolved by the entity into more loans and grants. It's not repaid to EPA. That's a question we frequently get. So we'll take more questions on revolving loan funds if we get them. Revolving loan funds are programs that entities get. An example of an RLF that was successful, KDHE used it to clean up this stove factory in Leavenworth. And an accomplishment in Waterloo was an RLF, an assessment, and a cleanup work together. This is an example where you can stack the funding, and a little bit of cleanup didn't finish it. The RLF helped to finish the cleanup. Multi-purpose grants this year are going to be worth $1 million. Multi-purpose grants allow a community to do both assessment and cleanup at the same time. You have to have at least one cleanup site identified at the time of the application, and you have to own that cleanup site. You can do more than one cleanup over the course of the multi-purpose grant. This allows you to do both assessment and cleanup and planning as part of the activity. It has to be at a discrete target area that is defined, a single discrete target area. So it's not a whole city, it's not a whole community. And you have to define that in your multi-purpose grant. All right, click. We have one of those right now in Lincoln, and they're working in the Haymarket area. The competition timeline right now, the applications are due on November 13th. There are recordings of many webinars on the EPA Brownfields website, epa.gov/Brownfields website, where EPA went through those guidelines and what were the changes from last year. If you're familiar with last year's guidelines, you'll be interested to see some additions to or some tweaks to things like EJ, things like additions to nuances about climate, and especially some interesting information about procurement, making sure that if you've done procurement, what you have to say in your guidelines. Please read your guidelines. If I haven't said it enough, you should read your guidelines. Also, there were some webinars held in Region 7 by Susan Klein, and those it can be accessed if you write to the R7-Brownfields web email, which I'll put up here in just a second. This is the timeline for when getting those grants out. Now, these are all clickable resources for you. Be sure, if you currently have a grant, to check these eligibility charts. And if you're planning on applying for more than one grant, to check these eligibility charts that are down here in this bottom. There's an interesting table that makes it clear whether or not you're eligible to be, whether or not you can apply for a certain grant, or, you know, if you apply for a multi-purpose, you can't also apply for a cleanup, or you know, so you kind of have to pick a lane. Make sure you're picking the lane you want to pick. So this is the Region 7 team website, or well, not website, email box, R7 Brownfields at EPA.gov. Like I said, we had a couple of webinars that we did after the national webinars that Susan Klein led some folks on. And if you want to reach out to this email box for copies of those, or if you're you're planning to apply and have questions, you may direct them to this box. I can tell you that if you have questions about threshold, all questions about threshold can be answered directly by the local office, Region 7. If you're with Region 7, you can write to Region 7. We can even review your threshold before you submit it. We can review it in advance. Threshold got people into some trouble last year. So we are really emphasizing people to read the guidelines. I can't tell where I am on the screen. Read the guidelines, especially on threshold. And don't fear calling and asking for help to make sure that you've got all those answers correct on threshold, because if you don't pass threshold, we can't even score your application, and you don't want that. You want to at least get scored. So there is that. Here is a list of all the people in our region and which states they are responsible for, and our different specializations. If you want that this is also, that says as of October 22. That is actually as of November 23. I just didn't change this slide. So that is what I have to say about that.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Any questions for Jennifer regarding the Brownfields grants? Nothing in the chat so far.
And I am going to paste the one link about procurement as well.
Oh, but there it is.
That is the last one that I wanted to do. But
all right. Thank you. Well, if there are no questions, again, we will have Q&A at the end of the webinar too. So in case you have some questions popping up a little bit later, you can still ask them, of course. Now, let me share my screen. We will have a 5-minute stretch break. So take advantage of it, but please be back. What is the time right now? 2:10. Be back at 2:15, please, because then we will hear from successful grantees and they will impart some wisdom as to the grants that they successfully applied for, and provide you with some tips and hints as to how to write a successful grant application for those specific grants that they got. So we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you. All right, I think we're gonna end our break here. Hopefully you all had the chance to get up from your desk, from your chair, and stretch a little bit. So our next segment deals with whatever successful grantees for environmental education, environmental justice, EPA brownfield assessment, and cleanup grants have to say about their application process, the challenges that they possibly ran into, the hints and tips that they have for applying for a successful grant application and make it a good one, obviously. And they also will talk a little bit about their respective projects. So we have Nancy Larson. She is the director of the Pollution Prevention Institute here at Kansas State University, and they were awarded an environmental education grant. So congratulations. We have Cindy Menz. She's the CEO of TrailNet in St. Louis, Missouri, and her organization received an environmental justice grant that she will talk about. Then we have 2 Brownfield grantees. The assessment Brownfield grantee is Peter Phillips. He is the Vice President in the Land Assemblage and Redevelopment Department of the St. Louis Development Corporation. And we have, for the cleanup grant, Tammy Johnson, Community Development Director with the City of Clinton, Iowa. So Nancy, do you want to go first? Since I mentioned you first. And to say, I mean, I just want to mention some of the presenters will have slides and some will not. So everything that we have is on the KSTAT website. It's posted to wherever you registered for this webinar. So don't expect slides from all 4 grantees.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And I'm glad to be here today. I'll just give an overview of the process and some of our, just as was mentioned, some of our successes, some of our challenges. And I'm going to share my screen here. And I just want to make sure that people can see that. So just please confirm you can see my screen.
Yes, coming
Great.
Across clearly.
And you're seeing it in presentation mode.
Correct.
Thank you so much for confirming that. All righty. As introduced, Nancy Larson, I'm the director with the K-State Pollution Prevention Institute. We'll just jump right in here. Our program, just to let you know a little bit about who we are, we are a program out of the College of Engineering at Kansas State University, just like Sabine and others are there who work in the technical assistance to Brownfields program and who are putting on this webinar, and also many thanks to EPA for doing this. But our program is 100% grant funded. We actually do not get any funding from the university. We're out of the College of Engineering. We're in a group called Engineering Extension, so we don't do traditional academic student teaching. We engage more with the community and, in our case, with industry. We provide at the Pollution Prevention Institute, we've been around since 1989, and we started with an EPA grant, the Pollution Prevention Grant, and we provide environmental, technical, and regulatory assistance to industry, institutions, community, and government. And we do that through various grants, and our mission is to assist industry, and our vision is for a healthy Kansas. But we've got more than 30 years experience writing these grants. And I have been director since 2004, and so have been the primary person responsible for writing grants. And we've been able to take our program from a very small kind of 3 FTE program to now we have 10, and we're looking at growing some more. Most of our applications were to EPA Region 7 and to headquarters, but we also work with USDA, and then we have a project that we do annually with our Kansas Department of Health and Environment. They are a regulatory program. And our success rate for our applications is pretty close to 90–95%. I've actually never calculated it, but we've kind of gotten into a rhythm. We have a pretty elaborate system for putting our applications together, and therefore we've been very successful. We also have a great team behind us that helps us from an administrative standpoint get our applications in complete as well as on time. So I just wanted to mention a little bit about our history there. So what makes for a successful proposal? Well, I will tell you the first thing is careful and multiple reviews of the request for proposal or request for application. So RFA or RFP. And I just went ahead and took a couple little snapshots of some RFAs, RFPs that I would have worked on that I still have in my file. This one's from 2014. and it was an environmental justice. And you can see how many times I've read through this, scribbled all over it. I have tabbed these many pages because you are going to need to go back through the RFA many, many different times to make sure you're picking up on all the little nuances, and you are including especially the things that are most important in your proposal. So that is one of my main tips to you. Now, I like to print off a hard copy, but in the last few years, I've really gone to more of electronic copies, and we've been able to share them throughout our writing team. But this is just an example of some of the work that goes into just those initial preparations for going through the RFP, and you will go through it multiple times. So then what makes for a successful proposal? I say ask yourself or your team, do the RFA goals and priorities fit within your agency's mission? Is this part of your mission, or are you going way outside your mission to make your project fit what EPA or whoever the funder is looking for? So you're gonna do best if you stay within your mission and don't spread yourself too thin. That is my philosophy and a question I've had. So every once in a while, someone on our team will bring a proposal forward, and our team will say, does this fit in our mission? Is this a good fit for us? Or maybe it's a better fit for one of our partners, and we can help them with it. And so we try to strive to do that because we have kind of a niche where we're really good at serving and we can be successful. And so this is the next question then. Is the funding sufficient? Because sometimes these smaller grants, there just isn't enough money there to really do meaningful and impactful work. In this case, for environmental education, we had a 33% match. That's not always easy to get when you are 100% grant funded. So if you want to make sure you can secure that kind of match, where are you going to get it? And then you're going to need letters of support or partnership that document that match will be provided. So also, who's going to work on the proposal, and do they have time? We typically like to have a team of 2 people, sometimes 3 people on our proposal writing team. But please know, you're going to spend a good 40 to 60 hours putting together one of these complete proposals. So you want to start early, as soon as it comes out. A lot of times we only have 60 days. What it does is we will establish milestones after reading the RFA. And literally we'll say, what is the task? Who's assigned to it? When is it due? And then we have a column that says, was it completed or not? And we will keep ourselves to those milestones as we meet on a regular basis to work through the proposal. At K-State, our procedures are require multi-level reviews and preparation. That requires that about 95% of our proposal actually be done about 2 weeks before the due date. I actually think that's very, very helpful because if you wait to the last minute, you're likely to forget something. Less chance that 40 to 60 hours you put in will actually get funded. Take advantage of the EPA provided resources. So I just jumped on the environmental education website. They have webinars. They even have a template for you now to follow, so you don't have to set up your own grant outline. You always want to write to the criteria, the evaluation criteria. That's the criteria that has the points next to it. Now, there's a lot of other things you need to provide, like how does it connect to the strategic plan? How does it meet these goals? But you always want to set your proposal up and write to the criteria in the order that it is in the RFA. The reason that is so important is you've got people reviewing your grant application who don't know you. They don't know your program. And they are reviewing it. And if you have set your proposal up to match what they've got to evaluate it against, you're using those key words then you are more likely to make it a lot easier for the reviewer. They won't have to go searching for what you're talking about, and you're more likely to have better points, assuming you meet all the requirements. And then be careful to include specifics. So like the cover letter. Recently, a proposal we wrote, the cover letter needed to be a lot different from what we had seen in the past. And make sure that if they're providing an example of that, I often just use their example and I personalize it for our project. Then I make sure I've got everything in that cover page, if you will. Make sure you've got the page number right. Sometimes it says count the cover letter, count the budget. All these things need to be within this page limit. And other times it says you don't have to count the cover page. And you don't have to count the budget or the timeline. So make sure you're really clear about that. If you aren't, ask. You can usually go through the website and you can ask a question like that. Font style and size, obviously really important. Threshold criteria is very important. If we have space, we literally list out the threshold criteria and say how we met it. We actually do that on about the second page, because as you know, if you don't meet those threshold criteria, the rest of your proposal is not going to be reviewed. It's just going to be disqualified. All righty. I also, as I'm writing, I keep a cheat sheet of items that I would like to go back to or include when I go back and double check my writing. I highly recommend that you reference scientific data or studies, and I'll give you an example of that. That can really highlight your problem statement and the need that you're trying to address. If space allows, use some formatting, use some color, highlight some points, or use some text boxes. And remember, review and review again. Work on the letters of support early. We always provide our partners with template language. That makes it a lot easier for them, and they can go in and tweak it. Make sure you give them a due date at least a couple of weeks before it is due. This is an example of scientific data that we might use. Certainly this is in a slide format, but we might take this type of information to push our point home that reducing waste is the number 3 top global action that can be done to reduce greenhouse gases. We always cite our sources, and we typically do that through footnoting to save a little space. Our particular project that we had was an environmental education grant. It is, we wrapped it up last April, but it was for $100,000, and it was impacted by COVID. We had a $33,000 match, and we gave out 5 subawards, $5,000 each. We conducted these types of outreach and education programs, and we were definitely impacted by COVID because of that timeline. It was right in 2020. And so it's pretty hard to do an outreach program with these communities and gather people together when, you know, we've been COVID impacted. But I wanted to share just briefly as I wrap up here, our successes and challenges. Some of the successes is we've met new community partners we've never worked with before. We got to learn about some really cool stuff that they're doing and how we could possibly partner again and how we might be able to assist them in other ways too. We worked in an area that our agency really wanted to work in. It fit our mission, but we just didn't have much funding in the way of working with food waste prevention projects. And so this allowed for that. We did make a meaningful impact. We developed new resources, and we hosted a really successful webinar for K through 12 schools. We found that EPA was very helpful, but I will say our grant officer changed 3 or 4 times. So that was a little bit challenging for us. So on the challenge side, obviously COVID partners can be a challenge too, because you're kind of chasing them down to make sure they're getting their work done, that you can help them. Also trying to get some of the match and some of the other things done with some of these small community partners who might wear a bunch of hats. Our sub-awards were very small, $5,000. A $5,000 sub-award actually has a lot of administrative fees for us on top of it. That is one of the things that we learned that we probably would not engage or do again. Chasing the match down was a little challenging. And then we were required to do quarterly reports. Those quarterly reports were very time consuming. And I'd recommend to EPA that they should go to semi-annual reports for that particular grant. So with that, I think we'll have question and answer at the end. So I will stop sharing and pass it to our next presenter.
All right, thank you, Nancy. And if there's anything that people want to put in the chat question-wise, please put who that question is directed to for this panel. All right, so next up we have Cindy Mintz with Heartland from St. Louis. Cindy, are you on? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
All right. Terrific. Hi, I'm Cindy Mintz. I'm the CEO at TrailNet in St. Louis, and we are a 34-year-old nonprofit, and our mission is to lead in fostering healthy, active, and vibrant communities where walking, biking, and the use of transit become a way of life. So when we approach these EPA grants, I think our biggest challenge is that we aren't a place-based entity. I'm not just working in my special neighborhood and with my special community. My community is the St. Louis region. And so having our mission resonate with communities who want to work with us is one of our big challenges. Our work includes advocacy, education, planning for bicycle pedestrian infrastructure and safer infrastructure, community engagement, and encouragement. So what are we peddling? We are selling this idea that safe and accessible sidewalks and streets are going to improve health. They're going to foster community belonging, boost the economy, ensure transportation access for all, and contribute to a sustainable environment. So this is why the EPA grants really appeal to us, because we're like, wow, if we can get communities on board that want this type of work, then we certainly can help them get there. So I'm going to stop sharing slides for a moment. So when we are trying to sell this idea of complete streets, let me see if I can share this slide really quick. Okay. So here's that gives you an idea of what it looks like. So in working with community,
Cindy, if there's any audio to this, we cannot hear it.
oh, so I'll just stop sharing because it pretty much there isn't any audio. It's really just music that goes along with it. But essentially, this is the idea that we're selling to our partners. And when we were putting together the application, there's a section where there's a table and you're supposed to mention all of your partners. And so concepting the idea and getting them on board with the type of changes that we believe are going to improve their community really requires having this ongoing and longstanding partnership. And so one of the things that I always I think about, especially during we're heading towards the holiday season. A couple of years ago, I was planning to make this special Nicaraguan tamale, nacatamal for Thanksgiving. And I asked my mom for the recipe, and she found it, but of course it was all in Spanish, and I'm the lost generation that wasn't taught to speak Spanish. So I'm piecing it together, and I was like, Mom, what's this part where they're talking about a pig pen? I was like, what? Like, I don't understand what this is. So she reads it to me, and it says, fatten the pig. So if you want a good tamale, you got to fatten the pig. So that takes a lot of engagement. And so I was thinking about community. It's like, what have I done to fatten the pig so I can come later and harvest it and want to, pull together a project and move things forward. So with that in mind, I share the timeline of how we stay engaged with community. So one of the communities that we worked with on the last grant that we had was the community of For the Ville. It's in the Ville neighborhood and Greater Ville neighborhood in St. Louis City. And as you can see, we had a series of funding situations with them. So we stayed present with this community. We started with in 2013 with a small grant where the baby step was, we want to prepare you to talk about what neighborhood greenways and traffic calming, how it could impact your community. Okay, we wanted to train and pay community champions to understand it, to be able to see how it might work in their neighborhood and if they even wanted it. So we had to be prepared to be like, they may not want this, right? And then after, we worked with several communities, one of them being the Ville, Greater Ville. And then when that funding ran out, we continued to hang on to their ideas, and we put it in a future grant. So in 2015, we got a Plan for Health grant. And at that point, we were able to secure funding to do traffic calming demonstrations. So what you saw was what it looks like when the infrastructure is in. But we had colored cones and baskets and flowers and tents, and we painted sidewalks or crosswalks, and we were able to demonstrate it in the neighborhood to see, now what do you think? You might have thought on paper this looks good, and you want some of these changes, but then we did the traffic calming demonstrations. And then in 2018, I think one of our challenges is staying engaged with the community, because the process of helping them become a healthier community, it doesn't happen overnight. So how do we stay engaged? So we stayed engaged creatively by, one of the things that TrailNet does is we do bike rides. So we partnered with For the Ville to create a Juneteenth celebration bike ride. So that was something in our back pocket. We do community bike rides, and we thought, you know what, we'll partner with For the Ville, even though we don't have money to do anything else right now. We're going to partner with them to just stay engaged. And we partnered in other ways. So when there were policy issues and policy barriers at the city, we were thinking about these communities and the barriers that they face and advocating for them. And then that brought us to 2019 when we received an EPA small grant to help move this community forward. So there's a long period of time where I'm fattening the pig to write this really great grant that says, these are my partners. They want to work together. They like the vision, and they want to make it their own. So we worked with these partners, and during this most recent grant, of course, COVID happened. We got the grant in 2019, and we had to remain patient because a lot of our work, requires the community to be, engaged and ready to talk about it. And everybody's everybody experienced this, that primary needs were really, you know, food, safety, COVID masks, that sort of thing. And we had to just kind of follow the lead of the community and step back a little bit and wait until they were ready to pick this up again. And we had to go at their pace. So that was part of what happened during our process. So this is an example of where the idea became their own. So what you see, the small picture is we did a little pop-up traffic calming demonstration. We've prepared them to talk about what traffic calming is, how it might affect their neighborhood, and just really got the ideas percolating. But this picture, this beautiful, colorful, you know, display here, this is what they did on their own. This had nothing to do with us, but we see it as our capacity building to say, you can make a difference in what your streets look like. You can secure funding when you organize yourself around a vision. And we're so excited that this is what they came up with. This is what buy-in and capacity building looks like. We just kind of got them started. Here's what it looks like. Here's how, you know, this can improve your community. And they decided what they felt would be most impactful was really working on this park space. And of course, I can't help looking at the open streets there, and that we could certainly put in a bike lane, put in a crosswalk, do some other things to help people safely access this park. But in working with the community, you have to let go, give them the power. What is their vision? And so they took off with this using the data and the work that we had done. This is what they want to lead with. And then we will continue to help as appropriate. You know, like I said, I can see on the street, we're like, we could use some crosswalks here and this, but we really want to let them lead with this idea and then go in and support them. And I wanted to just kind of address some of the challenges, like the EJScreen tool was like making me crazy. So I did just Google on YouTube, and I found that Washington State DOT had a EJScreen tool, how to use EJScreen. And I'm sure that it's on the website for the CDC, but it's probably buried. And I just, like, when I'm in the moment, I got to find my resource immediately. So using the EJScreen tool to help identify community, that was one of our challenges. We also found that it's really important to work with your project officer. Yes, and I know they change over. That happened to us, you know, obviously in Region 7, but we wanted to communicate the good news as well as the challenges. So if we did a feature in a newsletter, we sent it over. If we were having an event, we tried to invite them to come, because I figured the more they know about us, the more they'll encourage us to apply for other applications, or they can help us, you know, give us tips on future applications. And let's see. One of the other challenges was really staying engaged, you know, in between, especially if you get a small grant and then you're trying to build up to a bigger one, staying engaged in between. And so if you're an organization like us, I think that it's really helpful to be able to use what your typical work is and incorporate them in that work and find ways to include them in additional projects. So that is all I have. And I guess we'll save questions for the end, and I will turn off my my camera now. All right.
All right. Thank you, Cindy.
Sure.
All right. So we're going to segue to the Brownfields grants. So I think we'll do the assessment grant first. Peter Phillips, if you would like to talk about your applications, what was challenging, what kind of tips you have, pearls of wisdom, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and I don't have any slides prepared, but I am going to throw up. Here just to give a little background about St. Louis Development Corporation here. And so the organization I work for, it's an independent economic development agency. We do serve the city of St. Louis and the city of St. Louis proper, so not the region as a whole, so just the city. And with a goal to empower, develop, and transform the city through a vibrant, just, and growing economy. So I'm going to go down here. We have we have 3 pillars that we basically focus on, again, empowering, developing, and transforming. And we focus on that through these 4 main areas. We have minority and small business empowerment, neighborhood and community transformation, industry and business development, and then real estate development. So we'll see here that Brownfields very, very much impacts the neighborhood and community transformation and real estate development sections of our focus. And so Brownfields and our partnership with the EPA and the EPA grant competitions have been very important. Now, our organization has had a variety of different EPA grants, brownfield grants, over the years, long before, since I even started here, including a revolving loan fund award that went back as far as 2004. And that is now in post-closure that we're still managing. We received another RLF grant fiscal year 22. I've been involved in brownfield assessment grant applications that were awarded in fiscal year 2015, as well as our most recent assessment grant that is wrapping up now was fiscal year 2020. So, but also just a little background on the city itself, 62 square miles of developed land. And so, old industrial land, a lot of it. And so we focus on trying to revitalize properties that have been long vacant, try to, encourage job growth, and again, revitalization of neighborhoods and communities, trying to turn them into community spaces, green spaces, et cetera. But also, again, job creation. And we do have a focus on trying to save older buildings. Now, I talk about the buildings because I want to mention that the city of St. Louis's land bank, which is the oldest in the country, the land bank has held over this last year, I think the most recent numbers is just under 10,000 parcels, that the city's land bank owns almost 10,000 parcels, with about 1,900 of them having structures. And so I speak on this specifically because the city has, if we just use that as underutilized, vacant, abandoned property, because the city's land bank is the owner of last resort. So we get kind of the worst of the worst, those that no one wants. A lot of them do have environmental contamination. A lot of them are, with the age of the structure, were built with materials that have environmental hazards, including lead paint, asbestos containing materials, et cetera. And so, those are issues that maybe some people don't want to deal with, and they end up in the city's land bank. And then they're for us to figure out. And the reason I bring that up is so we rely very heavily on these EPA programs to try to deal with some of these things. I'm going to go ahead and just stop sharing. I just wanted to give a little background there. So we have no shortage of need for this type of funding assistance. And so again, I go back to the examples of some of the buildings and things we have. A lot of the buildings in the inventory, I think 95% of them were built prior to the 60s, maybe in the 50s, that era there. And so some of them are deteriorating. Now, while the city is charged with maintaining these properties as best we can, 10,000 parcels is difficult to maintain. I think we struggle enough sometimes even just to cut the grass on the vacant lots. So we're not going to be doing anything in terms of tuck pointing and roof repairs and all of this. Now, we have a variety of different initiatives recently using a lot of federal funds that have been coming in to try and stop the deterioration of these buildings, to stabilize them, to save them, and then get them marketed and sold for redevelopment, whether they be residential properties or commercial properties for job creation. And so the assessment grants that I'm wrapping up now, as well as the ones in the past, we normally focus on these land bank properties to try to understand what the potential environmental hazards are so that we can address them if possible, and then if we do not address them, or if we cannot address them, at least we have the information so that we can share that with the development community, and so that they are, one, informed if they're going to do a redevelopment of the things they need to do that development safely, but also, two, just to remove that uncertainty. I find that, again, when people think of environmental work, a lot of the focus is on the actual remediation, cleaning it up. We want to clean these things up. And so the assessment grant, to be clear, I'm assuming anyone who is interested in this already knows, but the assessment grant is for assessment and cleanup planning only. You do not have any remediation dollars with this, but it does not mean it is any less crucial. I really believe that the assessment is an insanely important first step to understand and to remove some of the uncertainty around brownfields. Just having the information is incredibly helpful, whether you're going to go out for a request for proposals for a redevelopment of a site, or if you just want to know what you have in your community so that you know how to maintain it, how to protect the residents, et cetera. The information is incredibly important. So just want to throw that out there, just like for some of the things that we do here, and like in our job in removing barriers to redevelopment and revitalizing communities, our partnership with the EPA and these EPA grants have been crucial. And so I want to get to that. That's just a little overview. The way we kind of break up our assessment program here is that we try to target and prioritize certain properties within the city boundaries that we want to know more, we want to assess, and that we want to target for cleanup, redevelopment, et cetera. So we have those that we've proactively chosen that we want to include in our applications for assessment. And that is part of our work plan that we go after, we know that. But we also try to keep a portion of our grant awards separate for those who maybe have, already maybe redevelopers or others who have identified properties themselves that they want to redevelop, but maybe need a little assistance in terms of doing that environmental due diligence. So we kind of separate it out in ones that we go after, that we assess, that we plan on cleaning, but then we also, if someone is looking to redevelop a city property, a land bank property, that maybe they need a little bit of help or offsetting some of the costs for the environmental due diligence, or they don't have the wherewithal to do it themselves, we use some of the EPA grants for that as well. And so that's kind of the plan. And then all throughout that process, though, we try to incorporate the residents, the community, stakeholders, the not-for-profits that work in the individual neighborhoods, the community development corporations, the city planning department, et cetera, just, to make sure that everyone is on the same page and knows what's going on. And then try to make the information available. We're in the process right now of trying to make it as available as possible by putting all documents online for everyone to see. But so that is the plan. That is what we generally do with the assessment grants, is just to get the information as best as possible, and for us to make the best decisions for the properties that we have and try to get them redeveloped. Now, I will also say, again, just with the how important the assessment is. If you're planning on the remediation portion of cleanup grants, revolving loan funds, et cetera, 100% necessary to have that assessment information anyway in your inventory so that you can accurately apply for those cleanup grants. So again, it is a stepping stone for the remediation, but in and of itself, if all you can get is an assessment grant, just having the information is helpful. So getting to the actual application itself, just a couple of things that I would focus on, I try to focus on myself, is, it is a daunting task. These grant applications, require a lot of information, a lot of detail, a lot of some things that might seem tedious. But I will tell you that, it's a theme that most people have said here, is that, they lay out everything in the guidelines that you need to respond to. So the first step, which is repetitive, but is read the guidelines, like every detail, every word of the guidelines and the scoring criteria, everything. Make sure that you are answering every single section of the guidelines. So that is first step. But I'm not going to rehash that too much. But so for me, the things that I focus on are the main sections that I want to make sure that I'm clear, accurate, and provide the right kind of data are on the community need. Now, I've already kind of mentioned that, you know, St. Louis has no end of need for these properties. We have the 10,000 properties that we need to try and assess or understand, et cetera. And so I have no end in sight from the list of that I can choose from to include. And again, given our industrial history of the site, like of the city, pretty much there are contaminants in the soil and buildings. If you're doing a redevelopment on a site that hasn't been touched or redeveloped in the last 30 years, there's going to be some environmental concerns, most likely, whether it's in the soil, groundwater, or in the building structure itself. And so the need is not our problem, but identifying and articulating that need, I do think, is incredibly important. And this is where I lean on the tools provided, you know, the EJScreen and the climate economic justice. I want to make sure I'm saying that right. The CJust, and let's see here. But yeah, climate and economic justice screening tool. Yeah, so those are extremely important. And helping you identify those community needs for your individual community. And I recommend also finding other national data and such, and cite that data. Be very specific in the potential issues for your city or your area, air quality, other health concerns, proximity to Superfund sites, et cetera. You know, whatever you can identify and what you know is a problem for your community and how you want to address it, use those tools, find the exact data, cite it, and then you're on your way. And then also, just as important though, is finding that information and then tying it into how knowing this information will help you to revitalize your area, bring these brownfields back online, and whether or not you have the money for the remediation or the redevelopment itself yet, that doesn't matter. It's more so of just that you have a plan. You know what the problem is and how you're going to solve the problem, and how these assessment funds will help you in that path. So laying that out and tying the need into how you are planning to use this information to help you revitalize this brownfield is important. So very much pay attention to those aspects of the application. The other part that I would mention, the other big part, is going to be the administrative and management capacity section. Now, this is both for the EPA and reviewing your application, but also for yourself. Just making sure that you know, as an applicant, that you're going to have the ability to actually manage this this application, this grant. You know, coordinating with the right aspects of the departments within your agency, your organization. Who's handling the actual draws, who's handling the procurement, who's handling the reporting, et cetera. I mean, you lay it all out, make sure that you have communicated with anyone and everyone in your agency who is going to be a part of this ahead of time, making sure everyone's on the same page, and that you can, that you're ready for this, that you understand what the requirements are, and that you can explain that in detail in your application. It does take some work. It does take a little bit of time, effort, knowledge, research, et cetera, and getting used to the various regulations, requirements, and the reporting, et cetera. Specifically surrounding, there's different requirements for, you know, for procuring phase 1 assessments or phase 2s. There's, you know, you'll have to get the quality assurance project plans and technical sampling and analysis plans for phase 2s. You'll need to get them approved by EPA before you can do anything. So really laying out how you're going to procure those services and who's going to manage them within your own agency necessary. You need to get that figured out, and you need to be able to explain it and prepare yourself for it, because it's a real thing that you're going to have to manage. So those are those are the two main things that I personally focus on and make sure that I am ready for in the applications, is that I have identified the need, know how it's going to, the assessment is going to help us address those needs. And then with the capacity section, and just making sure that I am on track with everyone here and how we're going to manage it, and be ready for once the grant gets awarded and we get the access to the funds, being ready to roll out with the proposed work plan and schedule, and being on track. You don't want to get off track. You want to make sure you're reporting everything to EPA as you're doing it. And so again, having that understanding within your own agency of how you're going to do that and that you have the capacity to do it is important. I find personally as an obstacle for the applications itself, the page limit always seems to be an obstacle for me. I would be lying if I said there's been an application or two that I've submitted where I might have maybe fudged on the margins a little bit to try to fit, to meet the page limit, because I want to add as much possible information as I can, and the page limit is restricting. So you have to make sure that you're being concise and accurate in what you're saying and getting everything answered. And then I don't want to put off the importance or not mention the importance again of utilizing any and all available planning documents that your city or state or anything might have, so that you're coordinating with other efforts, and so that you're saying, your agency may have a specific objective. We have a specific objective, but I make sure that I talk about all the other partners in the space that do similar things, or that we might be partnering with, maybe not formally in this application, but with planning, the City of St. Louis Planning Department, making sure that we're adhering towards neighborhood planning efforts or currently adopted plans, other initiatives that my agency might be having going on, just to make sure that we acknowledge and include anyone who needs to be included, including the residents themselves, in various steps in the process. So I would definitely think about the community input and involvement section very thoroughly. And then the last one, again, is just, I know that procurement has been a big thing here recently. And so making sure that you have mapped out and that you are compliant with all federal and local procurement policy guidelines. I would just make sure you're in on that. So again, that's the basics of it. Is, I mean, they give you everything that you need. The budget template tables, they give you every single detail. They ask you and tell you exactly what you need to provide them. So as long as you're reading the application correctly, you're sure that you can handle it, and what your community's need is, I think you're in a good place to have a good, successful application. And so I will go ahead and leave it at that, and be here for any questions if there are any after that.
Great. Thank you for this, Peter. That was very good. All right. Last but not least, we have Tammy Johnson from the city of Clinton, Iowa, with a brownfield cleanup grant. And I think, Tammy, you're a very fresh grantee, right? Recently, so hopefully the memories are good ones from writing that application.
Well, I'm very fresh to it. Thank you for asking me to do this. I'm so fresh. I've only been doing into the brownfields a little bit for the last year and a half. So we tried our hands at it at the cleanup grant. We actually did the cleanup and the assessment, and we're successful on the cleanup grant for our projects. Like I said, I've only been doing this a year and a half. City of Clinton is a small city. I am an office of myself and two other people. So when my administrator started me looking, we were first started with the brownfields with ECIA doing some phase 1, phase 2s. And they kept pushing us to go a little farther and bigger because we have a lot of problem areas here. And I really thought my administrator was losing his marbles when he wanted me to try this and go out to the Brownfields conference in Oklahoma. But when I come back, I told him, I said, well, I'm willing to give it a shot to apply for some grants and see. What I can say is, the biggest thing I can say with myself, I've never written a grant before. We hired a consultant to assist us in it. As well as I reached out to all kinds of partners within the city. We reached out and utilized our historical society to assist us, as well as our economic development corporation here in town, our Downtown Alliance Corporation. EPA and DNR were wonderful to assist us with questions, especially before we even started the grant process, because I just wasn't even sure where to begin. And then once we got the grants were released and I'm sitting here looking at everything, I was very overwhelmed and thinking, now I've really got myself into a pickle. But I can tell you the best thing I did was I took everything, sat there, read everything. And like everybody has already said, read the guidelines, read them, follow them. I sat reading them numerous times and I made checklists of everything I needed, what we had to have. And then we sat down, I got other city employees, my consultant, and we just sat in a group and started just assigning who was going to do what and look for stuff. And as we started getting everything and just compiling it the best we could. And, I'm still, even since May of getting the phone call that we got the grant, I'm still dismayed that we did. It is a complete community involvement. We had a lot of people that assisted us in it and continue to help us. The data research, reaching out and having other people help, because I had other aspects of my job to do. It was amazing how many people stepped up to help us. And I can't say enough about KTABs was great to work with and assist us, as well as the consultant we hired, and reaching out to the Iowa DNR as well, getting help from them. It really, truly, these are great grants, but they are overwhelming, and especially for a small city. I'm still, like I said, I'm still trying to figure out everything, and there's been a lot of challenges through this process. Just getting the grants finally submitted and sitting and waiting. The biggest thing, like I said, I sat with those checklists that I created of what needed to be in that grant. And I went through it, rewriting it, retyping it, going through everything. We used KTABs to read through it and check it for us. There's just, like I said, I'm still so new to this. It's amazing of the amount of help we got to do this. And just, ask people for help, ask them, reach out, reread everything. There's the challenges there. And we've had a lot since we got the grant for this. Our project is a 3/4 square block in town with dilapidated buildings. This has been a challenge for many years. And I will say, Peter, who spoke before me, talked about the page limit. That was very hard for me because I'm born and raised here. So sitting here trying to tell the community needs and the story for this project was very hard, because I really had to keep going back and trying to delete, shorten it, get it in those pages. And it's very hard because it's dear to my heart to see this project come through. But then it's hard to eliminate some of the stuff that you think needs to be told, but yet you're down to those page limits and stuff. And it is very hard. That was very hard for me, especially, like I said, because that project, I can go back to as a kid, knowing how bad that whole block area had looked almost all my life, and has gotten worse. It was hard. And I know I keep getting asked, are we going to apply for another one? And it wasn't what I thought it would be. It is harder than I thought. But yet with the help and the understanding from everybody, it does make it a little easier. And my biggest thing is reach out to anybody that has gotten a grant. I don't know how many times I've called another city close to us that has been tremendous in getting grants, and reached out to them for help. and assistants and ran things by them. But many times you've already heard today, it's those guidelines, read them. I had to reread them many times and would still catch other things I missed before. It's that community needs was a big thing. And I'm sorry, I'm not a very good public speaker. I don't like to speak to people in public. I'm great to do stuff on paper, but this isn't one of the things I like to do. But you know, I can't emphasize enough is to reach out to those community resources, as well as state resources. I reached out to many people to get the assistance and the help for it, especially on the data collecting and finding information out on the buildings and stuff. The city kind of got dumped with this whole block, and so it's been a challenge for us. And it's was even a bigger challenge after the last Brownfield conference, because we came home to part of our project actually collapsing the night we got home from the conference in August. So, and I can't say enough to say EPA has been wonderful to work with, very understanding, very helpful, and always willing to answer questions if they can. There's times you ask something and it's, nope, can't answer that, or they'll find the way to assist you or lead you to the place that will. These grants are wonderful, and I appreciate EPA giving us the grant. And like I said, I'm still in shock that we got one. I mean, so that's really, I don't really have a whole lot. Like I said, I'm just so new to this. So.
Well, you did a very good job. Although you don't like public speaking. It was great.
I do not.
Yeah, so I mean, congratulations on getting that the first try, because I mean, that's rare. I mean, usually, you know, it takes a few tries and getting some debriefs, and then,
you know, I said the easiest thing with that grant would have been if they'd let you submit photos, because if you could see the photos of these buildings in this block, that would seal the deal for anybody.
Yep.
Tammy,
no attachments, no photos.
Tammy, there's a comment in the chat, and I think the person is agreeing with you that the struggle is real. A lifetime of watching a neighborhood change, describing the situation, and addressing the criteria in 12 pages is very hard.
It is, you know, especially like I said, I'm a lifelong resident. I'm 55 years old, and I've watched that whole block all those years. And it is very much a struggle to see it to its point and then try to put it and pick the high points that need to be in there, because it all needs to be there.
Yep, exactly. And then being concise, like Peter said, you know, I mean, straightforward, and you don't want to ramble. And a lot of people do. So, yep. Okay, any questions for anybody at this point?
Peter,
just opening this up wide. Put it in the chat. Everybody is still muted.
Peter, go ahead, speak up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify, since we're talking about the page limits again, and I mentioned the thing about me kind of fudging the margins. I do not condone or encourage anyone doing the same thing. Do not do that. Okay, it's like, so it happened, but it's a joke, and do not do it. So let's just stick to the rules, please. So, but and then second, I just wanted to talk, like, again, just kind of mention that with both the application process as well as the administration and management process, I would encourage you to, you know, work out the timeline and the time frame for your projects and your plans, and then build in more time. Expect it to take longer, both the application and the actual management of your projects, longer than you expect. You know, plan for delays. I try to give people the it's not, and I'm not just talking about the process for EPA approvals and the inspections themselves related to assessments or the cleanups, whatever it is. You'll almost always run into something to where you're going to require more assessment, or something that you didn't see ahead of time or didn't plan for, or additional approvals that you might need from, whether it be, you know, the state or EPA. especially if you're using the state's, if your state has a voluntary cleanup program, et cetera. If you're running projects through that, just plan for more time than you will probably expect for it to take. Everything takes time, and so don't wait to the last minute on anything. And just make sure that you are, again, ready to take on the challenge, because it is a lot of work, not the application and the work itself. It takes a lot of time and effort. So that was just my last thing. But again, don't mess with fonts or margins.
Okay. Any questions from anybody?
I was just going to add to Peter's comment. With labor, I always ask the staff what they think it's going to take, and then I typically add 30%.
Oh, yeah.
What they're talking about. So I don't know if anybody else has a hard and fast rule that they use, but
I would say the same with budgets. Just kind of make sure you add some contingencies in there. I mean, from our perspective, since KSU TAB, I mean, we have been, we always review these grants. I mean, for the communities that want us to review them, right? And I would say, I mean, absolutely have them reviewed by an outside source, be it, I mean, could be a spouse, right? Or somebody who has no idea as to what you want to do, but if they understand what you want to do, then you're already halfway there. And I would say, if possible, build in enough time that you can get it reviewed at least 2 times, just to make sure. Because although the guidelines are very, very prescriptive, I mean, it's kind of hard to miss if you read them, and if you read them multiple times, right? Like nearly everybody said, but you really need to respond to everything. And the evaluation criteria, reading those really, really helps too.
I was going to remember, I have some crisis tips for having written grants for many, many years. I never allow staff to edit on the day that it is due. That is just nonsense. You cannot rewrite the narrative on the day that it's due. It means we're not ready. So you always want to back it up by a couple of days. But if you're in a nonprofit situation, you often rub right up against the day that it's due. And so I will come in as, in crisis mode and be like, we cannot do any more writing. Let's see what we've got. Let's see if we can send it. And then it's got to go. Because if you're doing that at 24 hours before it's due, that's trouble. I also wanted to say that we try and pay our community champions, and that was kind of tricky. We had to work with our project officer to figure out how to pay people.
That is something that is new in some of our grants this year, is stipends for community champions. So read your guidelines in the Brownfields grants this year. There are stipends for some of those community groups. So look at that.
And I was just going to add that we are in a very unique time right now as far as how much funding is available. And if you've never written a grant before, this is your opportunity. Step up to the plate and go for it, because this is probably one of the best opportunities in history, assuming it fits your mission and you're equipped to do it, right? Step up to the plate and go for it. So use the tips you heard today and go for it. I work with a lot of smaller programs across the country that provide technical compliance assistance. A lot of times they're in DNRs and there's just a few people, and they're very concerned about writing a grant and how to do it and how to be successful with it, but also creating maybe a position or a part-time position, and then how are you going to sustain it? That is definitely a concern. However, do not let that keep you from going for a proposal, especially, climate mitigation proposal that you have capacity to do and you could make a difference. So I just want to encourage people that way.
Thank you.
I would
Very good.
echo that. I was going to say the same thing. I know I mentioned a lot about, how managing it, in being the administrator of a grant can be, a lot of work, but I was going to just make sure that I wasn't scaring anyone off, because I agree that it's a better problem to have the money and figuring out how to use it than it is to not have the money to address these things. So 100%, if you see a need in your community and you have any, if you have any desire to go after these things, I would recommend that you do it for sure. Just know what you're getting into so that you're better prepared, so that you're actually able to manage it once you get awarded. But do not let anything scare you off of it. I would 100% agree. Go for it. And with all the, between EPA, the DNRs that we have, K-State, there are resources available, and everyone is willing to help awardees get through this. And so even if you get awarded and you feel a little overwhelmed, you're definitely not going to be alone or by yourself.
And I'd also point back to Jacob's discussion of the Tic-Tac network. There is a lot of additional money that goes back to, what EDA and we're going to hear and next week, we're going to hear about USDA as well. There's the funding that interlinks between all of this different stuff. We've got the EJ community problem solving may focus on something in your neighborhood that gets at a problem property that maybe you can work with someone in your community to have that brownfield dealt with. And then EDA funds can be used to actually develop it into something. And you can we're talking about leveraging all of these resources over time. But we're bringing this web together here because you're all here hearing about it now. I mean, this isn't just one shot. This is lots of apples to bite on.
And the other thing, and that was mentioned in the chat here, that, reach out to successful applicants in your region, like Tammy did, right? Just call them up. And for the Brownfields grants, I want to mention that we have successful grant applications on the K-State website, on the TAB website. So if you want to see how some things got written, what the wording was, not that I encourage you to copy anything, but you kind of see how they responded to the grant criteria and what kind of statistics, for example, they used in their grant application. And numbers are a big thing in these grants too, so keep that in mind. Any questions? Any more questions? Any more comments from anybody? Okay, think about that while I'm going to share my screen again. And I have one more slide here, which is this one. Again, questions we already added. Like with all these webinars, we are going to do evals, but I promise this one will be really short and painless. So we really appreciate that if you would do the evaluation for this webinar. So either click on the link, or I think there will be one put in the chat box too. Dana will do that, or scan this QR code from your phone and just answer these very few questions. I would think it's going to take you about 3 minutes to do that, but it helps us to make these things better, right? And provide the content that you want to see. So thank you in advance for doing that. And of course, now I have the slide up and I can't see the chat anymore. Let me see. Yep, okay. Take this off here so you can see the link again. So no more questions. Everything is good.
Session 3 next week.
That's the next slide here. Let me.
Okay.
So I'll give everybody time to get since it's in the chat, let me see if I can go.
This is typically our water cooler time for we can visit with folks about any topics that they have. If you've got a grant that you're working on and you want to talk to any of the experts who are here, you can access us, because this is the post conference visiting around the water cooler after the conference kind of talking, if you want.
Or, I mean, if you have something coming up and it comes to your mind a little bit later, I mean, you can always contact us. Phone, email, whatever works for you. So we're going to stay on for a few more minutes. But next week, we're going to have the last webinar in this series on November 9, same time at 1 p.m. If you registered for this webinar, you automatically are registered also for the next one.
Cindy asks what EPA grants are open right now. I believe, Monica, you have EJ grants open right now. Is that right? As well, the Brownfield grants, multi-purpose assessment and cleanup are open until November 13th. And I think those EJ grants that Jacob was talking about are open till November 8th or 9th, but I don't know which ones they are.
Is Jacob still on?
Oh, Monica was on a second ago, but I can't see there.
Yeah, I don't see her anymore. I think definitely what Jacob was talking about were the sub grants or something, you know, where people could apply to the grantees directly to get money.
Greg's on.
Yeah.
Grants are open until November 8th.
Okay.
And
Right.
did y'all see this question that came in? If awarded a grant, can we use an external nonprofit to manage the funds?
Specifically, are you talking about
I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see this.
I would direct that question, if you're talking about for Brownfields, I would look at the FAQs for the Brownfields grants and direct that question specifically to Brownfields, because it kind of depends on the organization that you're using.
I think you need to have that identified in your application, right? In your proposal,
Yeah,
or not?
like for example, I'm remembering Gary and what
Yeah.
we read the guidelines. And that would be something that would be addressed in programmatic capability and organization. You would definitely need to address it in how you were doing it, and you would need to reflect it as an other expense, because subawards are in other. If you would send that message to R7 at Brownfields, or R7 Brownfields at EPA.com or EPA.gov, that way I can get an answer to you from Susan Klein, who is our contact.
It's R7 _ Brownfields.
R7 _ at EPA.gov. Susan Klein is our contact, and we can make sure that we get the direct answer. Thank you for putting it in there. Get you the right answer exactly, because there's been some discussion, all I can say, internally about stuff.
One thing maybe I should mention also, I mean, since I'm reviewing grants and have been reviewing this for quite some time, make sure if the consultant writes your grant that you are aware of what's in that grant, right? Not that comes to a surprise later on to you when you are supposed to work on the work plan with EPA. make sure you understand it, what's in there. I mean, if there's any language in there that you don't understand, edit that, have it edited. I mean, be involved. Don't just hand this whole thing over to your consultant and say, have at it. And then you just kind of sign on the dotted line, so to speak. I mean, really become involved in the application. Any more questions? Well, I think we're gonna maybe keep this open for like a minute or two longer, and then we're gonna close the webinar if there's nothing else coming. Thank you all for attending. Thanks for our speakers to take the time and the effort to present today. Really appreciate that. There was a lot of expertise, and I wish you all a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you.